What's up everyone, welcome back to Cali Plants. It's me again, Mark, and today we're here at the greenhouse, and in this video we're gonna be discussing etiolation and overgrowing in succulents. So basically I'm gonna be showing you what is etiolation, how do you know if your succulent is etiolating, and how do you avoid it. So I wanted to do this quick video about etiolation because some of you beginners may not know the meaning of the word etiolation, or getting overgrown, or getting leggy, or getting stretched succulents. So I just wanted to give you a basic and thorough understanding of etiolation so that you know how to avoid it and so that you know how to fix if your succulents are etiolated. So first, let's define the meaning of the word etiolation. Now, etiolation, it is a process where a plant tries to reach for more light to get more nutrients so that it can develop a little bit more. Now, all plants develop etiolation. Some plants actually etiolate during the seed process. So while they are still seeds, they first start out as white plantlets because they're not yet producing chlorophyll because they don't yet receive light, so that they will be white and they will be stretching until they get light, and then they will turn green. Now when it comes to succulents, what they would look like if they're etiolating is kind of like this. So I would like to show you here. You can see that the stem is exposed and the leaves are far apart from each other, so they have a lot of space in between. So that is etiolation. They are not very compact. Now I would like to show you a very compact looking succulent. So this is a very compact succulent. You would not see the stem. It's kind of hidden inside those leaves, and it's very compact, and you can see that it's more beautiful than if it was etiolated. To explain it simply, succulents do this to reach for more light because, as we all know, plants need light to survive, to thrive. So that's how they do photosynthesis if they get light. So succulents, if they don't get enough light, they will etiolate. Now, etiolation in succulents doesn't automatically make them unhealthy. So this is not unhealthy at all. This could be a very healthy plant still. It's just etiolated a little bit. So especially if it's been put in shade for a little while and then placed back in full sun, then it can be healthy again. But there are some disadvantages when your succulent is always etiolated. So for starters, it might not look as good as if it was compact, as if it was more tightly grown. Also, etiolated succulents are much harder to propagate. Now this is just my theory, but I think that when the leaves are more stretched, then they have less energy inside them because they are stretching out for light. So the energy is much spread out into the leaf, and it's not as tight into the leaf because it's reaching for more light. So it has less energy than if it got a lot more light. So succulents that have more light, that get more light, and that have plumper and much compact leaves, they can propagate a lot better. Also, etiolated succulents will not do very well when acclimating and when they are being shipped because etiolated succulents, they are more prone to rot than if they were not etiolated. So you would know succulents that are mature, they have a thicker stem. So non-etiolated plants, if they get a lot of sun, they will produce this corking on the stem that makes them more tougher, that makes them more resistant to rot. So if your succulent has corking in their stem, then it might not be etiolating, or it might be getting stronger because it's getting a lot more light. So this will be a tougher plant to ship and a tougher plant to propagate. So it will not get rot as easily as if it was etiolated. So this one, you can see the stem here is a little bit pale. It doesn't have any corking. So that's because it's etiolated. So it's more prone to rot than compared to this plant. Now let's go on to the second subtopic, and that is how would you know if your succulent is etiolating. So if you would know the normal growth of succulents, you would know that if a succulent is getting longer, getting taller than usual, then it is etiolating. So for example, with this plant, it's getting a lot more taller. I would know because the leaves are more separated than each other. So the leaves are growing farther apart from each other. So that's how I would know that it's etiolating. Also, the leaves are growing much wider, much longer leaves than much narrower, or than much more compact leaves. So leaves could be shaped differently depending on the type of the plant, but if you're getting a plant that is more that has more stretched out leaves than compact ones, then that is an etiolated plant. This is a Graptoveria titubans. You can see that the leaves here are longer compared to the leaves here at the top because those leaves are etiolated. So this plant probably have been growing in a shaded area, so which is why it got etiolated like that. So you would know etiolated succulents also are harder to repot because they're too tall. They can tumble over, so that's another disadvantage with them. So you would really not want to etiolate your succulents. Also, another sign that your plant is etiolating is if it's losing its color. So if it's getting more green or getting more pale, then that means that it's not getting the right amount of light that it needs. So it means that it's etiolating, it's getting too little light. If your plant, if you Google it and it's a lot more colorful and your plant is much paler than the photos at the Google, then that means that you might not be giving enough light to your succulents. Now also, I would just like to give you a heads up that not all succulents will grow compact. So some succulents will actually have a little bit of habit of etiolating or stretching. So actually, some of the succulents here at the back, the taller type succulents, so they're the ones that really grow upright. They're still growing healthy, but they're just growing upright. They're not the low growing type of succulents. So now that we know how to identify etiolation in succulents, how could we avoid it? So if you want to avoid etiolation, you have to give your succulents a lot more light than you're probably giving them now if they're etiolating. So move them into a more sunnier location. Now if you're afraid that your succulent might burn, then you might want to invest in protection. I've said it before, you might want to invest in garden nets in your area so that they don't get a lot more sunburn. But actually, succulents that get a lot more sun will produce more growth, that will produce much healthier compact growth, and they will also produce much tougher roots than if they were in a more shaded area. So I would think that a pretty sunny location is still the best for succulents, just as long that they are not burning and you can pretty much see if they are burning, so that you just have to adjust their location if you're seeing signs of burning. But I think that if your succulent can acclimate to a lot more sunnier area, then I think it would be better for them if they can withstand a lot more sun, because they will grow more if they get more sun. Now the other thing to avoid etiolation in succulents or overgrowing in succulents is to avoid giving them too much fertilization. Now other people, they would always like to fertilize their plants. They would like to give them a lot of osmocote, or they would invest in vermicast or in many different kind of fertilizers so that they can make larger plants. But it's not always good for succulents because succulents are not very nutrient thirsty. They don't need a lot of nutrients to grow. Actually, a lot of my succulents here have grown without getting much fertilization. They can pretty much produce nutrients for their own. I think this plant, I've been continuously growing it, but I haven't been giving it a lot of osmocote or a lot of slow growing fertilizer. I think I've had vermicast in its potting mix, but that's about it for the fertilization I give with my succulents. Because if you give them a lot more fertilization when it's not the proper growing season, then they will etiolate. Especially during the colder months, during the winter, you would not want to fertilize your succulents a lot because they will really etiolate. They will produce more growth if they get more fertilization. If it's not very sunny, because during the winter the days are shorter, so they might stretch out a lot more if you're giving them much fertilization. Also, you would not to water your succulents a lot if it's very shaded in your area, because watering your plants will push them to grow more, and if they don't get much sun, then they will etiolate. Now actually, this is also an issue with other growers here in the Philippines, because some growers which sell succulents, they spray their succulents with plenty of fertilizers so that they can grow their succulents much bigger, and then they can sell them much quicker, because we all know that succulents, if you just leave them be, then they will grow very slowly. So these growers, they give a lot more fertilizer than the succulent needs. So what happens is these succulents which are grown with much more fertilizers, and they get a lot of sun, and they're in a cold area, because in the highlands it's much colder there, so the succulent will grow big, but it will grow weaker. Now those big succulents that you might find online, if you're not careful with them, then they might easily die if they reach you, because they're not hard grown. They're etiolated, they're overgrown, they're much bigger for their age. And also, since they are grown in a very good surrounding, in a very good environment, in a greenhouse and with plenty of fertilization, they might have a harder time adjusting to your place, which doesn't have that good of a condition than where they came from. So if you have to be extra careful with buying overgrown etiolated succulents, because some of them might not really survive right away, especially if you're the beginner and you don't have much experience with succulents. What I found with my experience buying those etiolated overgrown succulents is that they can tend to lose a lot of their leaves, because those leaves are not very sturdy, they're not very plump with water because they're overgrown, so they don't look as thick as they're supposed to. That's how etiolated overgrown succulents are. I think this would be a good example, because this is an Echeveria champagne hybrid. It could probably be a white champagne. So you can see that the leaves are very thin. So because when I got this plant, it doesn't have much moisture inside of it because it's an etiolated overgrown plant. You can see that it's already showing its stem right there. So it's stretching out for light. So the leaves doesn't hold a lot of water because it's overgrown. It's grown more than it's supposed to be, so which is why it's taking a lot harder for me to acclimate this, to make this root, because if they don't have much energy in their leaves, then they will have a longer time to root. So it might be difficult for you to acclimate overgrown etiolated succulents. So because of these problems, I would recommend that you don't give your succulents a lot of fertilizers. Actually, a viewer of ours here at the channel, he recently asked me about growth hormones and should I use growth hormones in succulents, which is why I would not recommend that at all. Succulents don't need a lot of fertilization to make them grow, and if you actually give them a lot more than what they need, then they might etiolate and they might not be as healthy as if they are more organically or more naturally grown. Now also, if you're a grower that plans to sell your plants, if you're a grower that plans to sell your plants, I would recommend that you don't give it a lot of fertilization, because if your buyers are getting bad experiences with their plants, then they might not buy from you soon. So I would recommend that you give your plant enough time to develop on their own without much fertilization, because if you're growing your plants too big and too quickly, then they might not be strong enough to survive the place where they will be going once they are bought. Now finally, how would you fix etiolated succulents? If your plant is already stretched out and it's already looking very ugly, then I would recommend that you cut off the head, the stem that is closest to the compact part of the head. So you take that off, you cut that off, and then you replant it. And if you want your plant to produce much wider rosettes, because this is not a wide rosette for atitobans, this is actually a very narrow and very long shaped plant. If you want it to grow bigger and wider, then you give it plenty more sun, a lot more sun, so that it will not etiolate, and instead of growing upright, it will grow wider, because healthy succulents actually grow out and not grow tall. They don't grow up, but rather they grow outwards. They grow much more bigger in size. And you will also know that they are growing healthy if the center of the rosette is much more intact, or it's much more lower than the outer part of the rosette. If your plant is getting much taller central rosettes than the outer leaves, if it's much taller at the center, then that might mean that it's already etiolating. So that's just another sign that your plant is etiolating. So I think that's about it for this video, guys. If you have any questions about etiolation in succulents, make sure to comment it down below. I will try to answer as much comments as I can. And also, if you like the tips that I shared with you, please hit the like, and also please subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.